Welcome to the Carousel of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Allie Wagner. Thank you to everyone who joined us last week for our annual fundraiser, Animals After Dark. I am told everyone had a great time and even got to see the Northern Lights. You notice I said, I am told. That is because I, like almost a dozen other folks, got sick and was unable to make it to the fundraiser. Which is also why, dear listener, there was no podcast last week. But I am back and delighted to share with you a very special episode. One of the highlights of last week's party was the opportunity for the Carousel family to celebrate the life and legacy of one of its most ardent supporters and ambassadors, Doug Cosper. Doug passed away from cancer this past July. In addition to being a lifelong journalist and educator, Doug was a close friend of Scott's and one of the Carousel's earliest supporters. You'll hear how Doug crammed multiple lifetimes into one, traveling the world, speaking truth to power as a reporter, mentoring journalists in young democracies abroad, and building multiple family homes, all while supporting his friend Scott, the one with a crazy carousel idea. Let us begin with today's story. What does a waterbed salesman, a journalist, a university instructor, a Fulbright scholar, and a novelist all have in common? Turns out, each of these professions was experienced by just one man over the course of 75 full years of life. And Doug was proud of each of these titles and accomplishments, to be sure. But he said one of his greatest honors in this lifetime was serving as an operator for the Carousel of Happiness. That's because he got it. Carol Rowe, his wife, explained to me that from the very beginning, Doug knew how important Scott's Carousel project was. And when I say the very beginning, I mean the very beginning. Doug and Scott moved to Netherlands roughly around the same time and had daughters roughly the same age. In the 80s, when Scott was carving at his house early on, Doug found out and he fell in love. Remember, this is decades before the carousel is built, decades before the 1 million+ riders walk through these doors, decades before the press, before the attention, before the dream itself is tangible. The dream is not yet realized. Even back then, Doug got it. And the truth is, not everyone can see a dream before it's realized. Particularly when the dream belongs to someone else. It takes a very special kind of person to see someone else's vision before it is manifest in the physical world. And Doug Cosper was that kind of person. From the very beginning, he got it. From the very beginning, Doug understood that the carousel wasn't just a physical thing, a physical space. It was a story of healing, a story of purpose, a story of persistence. And Doug knew the power of a good story. Doug moved to Netherlands in the 80s to study journalism at CU Boulder. He wanted to live in the mountains while also studying journalism, and Netherlands allowed him to do that. But Doug wasn't a mountain boy by birth. Born in St. Louis and raised in Tyler, Texas, Doug fell in love with the mountains after living in Mammoth, California, where he worked as a handyman at a lodge. While he enjoyed working with his hands, he also felt called to work with his mind, which is why he came to CU to study journalism. But before that, Doug graduated from Southern Methodist University in the early 70s, and after college, co-founded a successful waterbed business with some of his classmates. He managed to turn a $6,000 loan into a business worth over $1 million. But after 5 years, he was looking for more. He sold his shares in the business, grabbed his backpack, and traveled throughout the Middle East and South Asia on the hippie trail, which eventually led him to Mammoth and then later to Nederland. Doug did odd jobs around Nederland and built the first of 2 family homes in town while waiting for his in-state tuition to kick in. When classes started, he dove into journalism just like he had done everything else in his life thus far. Doug loved watchdogging the powerful through journalism. He loved speaking truth through the written word, and while his reporting was fierce, his heart was incredibly tender. He used his gift of storytelling to inspire wonder in both of his Oh, God. Doug did odd jobs around Nederland and built the first of 2 family houses he would build here in Nederland while waiting for his in-state tuition to kick in. When classes started, he dove into journalism just like he had done everything else in his life thus far. Doug loved watchdogging the powerful. He loved speaking truth through the written word, and while his reporting was fierce, his heart was incredibly tender. He used his gift of storytelling to inspire wonder in both of his daughters while telling them stories at their bedtime. And when his new friend Scott bought a used carousel carcass from Utah, Doug was one of the first people to hop in the U-Haul and bring it back to Ned. After graduating from CU, Doug began his newspaper reporting career in Tyler, Texas, working at both the Tyler Morning Telegraph and the Tyler Courier-Times. But after 2 years, he was ready for a change. He took a job with United Press International as a foreign correspondent in The Hague, covering the World Court, NATO, and the European Economic Community before it became the EU. He was a natural and agile newsman who had a knack of getting the news behind the news. In the 90s, after his stint abroad, he returned to Nederland to build the second family home and started teaching journalism at his alma mater. He then returned to newspaper reporting at both the Boulder Planet and the Daily Camera, where he met Carol Rowe, another journalist. They fell in love. Carol remembers being drawn to Doug's combination of Texas swagger and tender heart. They worked together, but on separate beats, though she does remember writing one story together about the 100-year flood, and it even won an award, she said. Soon, Doug was ready to go back abroad, this time as a teacher of journalism. For the next 12 years, he taught journalism in developing countries, fledgling democracies, and those still under authoritarian or military control. While the circumstances in some of these countries was rough, Doug was a compassionate and generous teacher, meeting students where they were and gently nudging them toward the next level. His overseas posts ranged in duration from as little as 1 month to up to an academic year and spanned the entire globe. Doug Cosper is responsible for educating journalists in Romania, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Azerbaijan, the Maldives, Botswana, East Timor, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Myanmar, and South Sudan. In between stints abroad, Doug returned to Carol and returned to the Carousel, chipping in and helping out wherever it was needed. When Scott needed board members for his fledgling nonprofit, Doug signed up. When the building needed to be fixed or money needed to be raised, Doug signed up. But more than that, Doug was an ambassador for the Carousel. No matter where he was in the world or who he was with, Doug insisted they know about the Carousel. He insisted they listen to the story. If someone was in Ned from out of town and the Carousel was closed, he would run down and let them in and give them a private ride. He was one of the Carousel's fiercest champions and ardent cheerleaders. Eventually, Doug retired in 2013 and became a carousel operator. He and Carol started exploring the world together, learning Spanish and traveling throughout Central America. On a rafting trip to the Grand Canyon, Carol and Doug floated the Colorado River for 18 days on wooden dories. Just as they were approaching one of the more dangerous rapids, as the guides are preparing the guests and the boats for the potential danger that lie ahead, Doug turned to Carol and asked, "Will you marry me?" "You're asking me now?" she thought. Doug and Carol married in 2013, despite a historic flood delaying their wedding by a week. She would retire that year as well, and with Doug's encouragement, applied to a UN volunteer position in Liberia. She was only there 3 months before Doug had to come visit and keep her company for the rest of the post. When they returned in the spring of 2015, Doug was diagnosed with cancer. When the doctors told him he had 3 or 4 maybe years to live, he started reflecting on his legacy. That's when he remembered those bedtime stories he used to tell his daughters. Now, loaded with a lifetime of memories and stories, he began to write them down, weaving the people and places he had experienced into what would become a middle grade fantasy novel about a boy and a butterfly named Mira called On Wings of Wonder. Doug's imprint on the Carousel is evident. He is the reason there is a Wonder Box in the gift shop. He is the reason you pass through the Wonder Gate upon entering the Carousel. He is the reason there is a massive butterfly floating above the sweatshirts. Doug understood the power of wonder and sought to inspire it within the people he touched. He loved children, and in addition to his own, he was the adopted grandfather of many local kids. One of his adopted grandchildren had a wonder shelf where he and Doug would put trinkets and rocks and other knickknacks that inspired wonder. Carol explained that the Carousel felt like a family environment for both her and Doug. Both have served on the board, and Doug was one of the first co-administrators of the Carousel. The Carousel offered them a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of family. For them, the Carousel is part of their history. When I started working for the Carousel last year and told Doug about my idea for the podcast, he was one of the first to listen to the trailer, giving me a few notes, encouraging me to move forward, trusting in my vision. And while our time together was very short, I got a taste of what so many students and young journalists worldwide experienced when they worked with Doug. He had a sharp eye for story, a gentle way of mentoring, and an ability to support others while they realize their own vision. Doug is an example of the people who have come into the carousel's orbit and changed it for the better. He is an example of the support Scott received along the way as he moved forward in building his dream. If you'd like to see Mira the butterfly in the gift shop or buy a copy of Doug's book, come into the carousel and check them out. Maybe even sit at the coloring table and contribute to the Wonder Box, sharing with the world what makes you wonder. In the meantime, take care. Be well. And as we like to say at the Carousel of Happiness, don't delay joy. And we'll see ya next time around.
Beginnings and endings are only pretendings. I'll see you next time around. I'll see you next time.